Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar on updates to NEFE's 5 key factors for effective financial education. My name is Greg Morgan, NEFE's Senior Manager of Communication. Just a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be on mute for the presentation, and we will have a question and answer session near the end. If you'd like to submit a question, please use the Q&A button, and we will get to as many questions as we can. We hope everyone is having a successful Financial Capability Month, or also known as Financial Literacy Month, a time of year where our field has the attention of new and diverse audiences, and we can amplify the importance of our work. Each April, we here at NEFE aim to share and promote important initiatives, and today is a great example as we provide updates to our 5 key factors for effective financial education. Discussing the importance of these updates are 2 members of NEFE's leadership team, President and CEO, Dr. Billy Hensley, and Research and Policy Senior Vice President, Dr. Beth Bean. Joining them is Dr. Angela Fontes, Managing Partner of Fontes Research LLC, among other titles that she has. She worked with the NEFE team to ensure the new version of the 5 key factors was backed by data and continues to be a relevant resource. Together, they will cover a bit of the history, the methodology for developing the updates, a deep dive into the new language, and how they can be implemented. With that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Beth Bean for her introductory thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. As Greg mentioned, our agenda today, we will cover the history of the 5 key factors. We'll go over the methodology. We'll do a deep dive with Angela and the 5 key factors, and then we will collectively put the factors into action. So our objectives for the webinar today, sorry, I have to move my pictures, to place the factors into the broader context of the field. We want to highlight the results of an independent review and validation of the factors, provide stakeholders with a firm understanding of the updated factors, and identify opportunities for the field to leverage the factors going forward. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Billy Hensley. Oops. Did I get rid of the slides?
Nope.
Sorry. Okay, great. Who was the original creator of the 5 key factors, and he'll go do a brief history for us.
Well, that's not the only reason you're asking me to do the
Well,
history.
and you also know, yeah.
Well, I've been around Lowe these many years, and but this began. I still can picture the moment sitting in our old office in the training room with, many of you may know or remember, Susan Sharkey, who ran our high school program. And this was 2013, and we were having a discussion about how sort of muddled it is to measure the effectiveness of an intervention like a financial education course when every person has the permission to call what they do financial education without any parameters within that. And so we had a one-time workshop calling itself sort of comprehensive financial education, a listserv or a newsletter, counting. And so we felt that to strengthen how you measure the intervention itself, as well as all the factors that go into educational growth, knowledge, behavior change, teacher training, all the pieces that go with any kind of other educational subject, we wanted to imprint that upon our own field in terms of a minimum standard of what counts as financial education. So then we get a better baseline for measuring the intervention itself, but the outcomes that are associated with that. And so Susan spent, I think it was 15 to 20 years as a business teacher, teaching personal finance. And I did my graduate work, my master's and my Ph.D. are in education. And we put our heads together and worked through this sort of framework for these 5 factors that have to be present in order to call what you're doing financial education. Otherwise, it's financial information, and that's fine, and that can help you make a decision. But what we wanted to do was build some stronger underpinnings for the full educational experience itself. And that's where that started. And like many things, as we evolved our understanding over time, as the research literature in FinEd in particular got stronger, and as we drew from the educational research literature, we were able to sort of begin to flesh this out. And it was really time for us to upgrade this and We've been involved in these conversations with our peers and the brilliant people in the Office of Financial Education at the CFPB, for example, and our friends at other federal agencies who have done financial education for many years, as well as teachers and practitioners. But we wanted to formalize this update and make sure that what we're doing is relevant for the future. So that is the Reader's Digest condensed version of the history of 5 key factors, and we'll turn it back over to the people who actually did the project. So thank you for being here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Billy. Whoops. Sorry, my slides aren't advancing. Oh no. Shoot. I'm not sure why the slide's not advancing. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to stop and I'm going to reshare my slides to get them to work. So I apologize for that. So sorry. You can just take in all the information that Billy just gave you as you're waiting for these to come up. Okay, perfect. So thank you, Billy. And as Billy mentioned, these were done back in 2014. So the research and policy team and all of NEFE thought it would be time, as Billy mentioned, to just make sure these were relevant. The field's changed a lot. And so with that, we decided it was time to put out an RFI and just ask for consultants, researchers to come in, validate the 5 key factors, ensure they were still relevant, see if there was any revisions, updates needed. And that's where Dr. Angela Fountas comes in. So I will now turn it over to her to walk through the great work that she did.
Great. Thanks so much, Beth. And thanks to the NEFE team for allowing me to be part of this project and being so great to work with. It's been a really fun past year that we've been working on this together, and I'm so excited to be now presenting it to the world. So we really followed 4 steps in our methodology in terms of developing these revised factors. And we wanted, as NEFE does always, we wanted this to be grounded in research, in data, and not just what we sort of sat around a table and thought about, but to follow that tradition with which the original factors were developed in looking to the literature and looking to see what was happening. We also really wanted to make sure we were involving all of the stakeholders that would potentially be using the factors or might be impacted by any changes that were made to these factors. And so we followed these 4 steps. The first 2, the landscape analysis and stakeholder interviews, really focused on looking at the factor framework itself. And then the second 2, the literature review and discussion board, really hone in on each of the factors individually and try to make sure we've got each of those factor definitions correct. So I'll just dive in here. Our first phase, our landscape analysis. Obviously, as researchers, we assign research questions to each one of these phases. We wanted to make sure that this framework, this 5-factor framework, made sense. And we really wanted to understand the framework in the context of other frameworks, both from the educational space generically, but also from the financial education space specifically. And what we ended up doing is really doing a deep dive both on general educational frameworks and finding several that made sense as comparators, and then specifically looking at frameworks on financial education specifically, and identified 3 that we wanted to use as comparators. What we ended up doing is really creating a table on the next slide to try to identify where do each of these what components of the educational experience do each of these frameworks hit on, and what does that look like? Part of the idea here was to really make sure that this framework of 5 factors, that the factors topics generically made sense and were aligned enough with what we were seeing in the extant sort of literature on frameworks related to education, financial education specifically, but also different enough that it made sense to have these as something separate. And so here you can sort of see where we had identified the who, what, when, how, and where, and then also the evaluative component of each of these. What we took away from this first phase was that this framework really made sense and was really aligned with what we were seeing in other frameworks, but was different enough and comprehensive enough that it made sense to have this 5 factors live separately from any other framework that was out there. The second phase, our stakeholder interviews, was our first opportunity for us to go out, identify some stakeholders that we wanted to have weigh in on the 5 factors generally, and again, specifically around the framework. And so we looked across NEFE's spectrum of stakeholders and identified folks from government, from higher education, including extension, private industry, and then folks who are also involved in financial education at the nonprofit or foundation level. We wanted to understand here, how are the factors sort of used in the wild? How do people perceive these factors? Are they familiar with them? How are they using them? What are they using them for? And then to start to get a sense of what felt missing, or how could the factors sort of be improved from this wide variety of stakeholders that we identified here. And so you can see along the right just some very preliminary statistics on who was in our sample of 10 stakeholders that we conducted these interviews. And we were very intentional about making sure we got some real diversity in the folks that we interviewed. And so you can see some internal, some external folks. These were 10 interviews, 60-minute, semi-structured, and they were all done virtually. I mentioned we have government, academia, community education, and foundations focused on financial education. And what we developed out of these were some anonymous written summaries for each of the interviews. We then turned to looking at each of the factors individually. And so not surprisingly, we did a deep dive literature review here. And the idea here was to identify current research that either supported each of the factors or identify research that suggested other factors were more important or that contradicted something that we had in the existing 5 factors. And so really wanted to make sure that since these were originally developed about a decade ago, was there any literature that had been published that made us think other factors were more important, or these factors we had identified were not in fact important? Or were we seeing literature that supported each of the 5 factors, the way, at least the idea or the concept of the 5 factors? And so we put together an annotated bibliography with 29 citations, which is just a start. But we also ended up putting together a table that sort of identified for each of the pieces of literature which factor they were related to. And this was obviously a subjective process. But one of the things I really wanted to make sure that we got out of this project for NEFE and certainly for the field was a bit of a toolkit in using, identifying, working with each of the 5 factors. And so that annotated bibliography really gave us a good start on understanding, were these the 5 factors that were most important? And what are the components or aspects of each of these 5 that really made them the top 5 that we wanted to talk about? After this, we developed our initial drafts of the definitions of each of the 5 factors. And when we worked with the policy team, I think it became very clear that we wanted a longer definition that really spoke to our folks in higher academia, our researchers, but that it was also really important that we had a shorter, sort of the elevator speech 10-second definition that we could provide to non-technical folks or folks who we only had a couple of minutes with. And so you'll see in a minute, we have a long version of each of the factors and a short version of the definitions. Here was our second opportunity to have stakeholders weigh in. And so we wanted to do, we did an online discussion board, which is an asynchronous sort of focus group that is conducted entirely online. And we recruited financial educators to be participants in this discussion board. We wanted to better understand, do the factors seem complete? These new drafts that we had developed. And we really wanted to make sure we got a gut check on the language and made certain that the language we were using was not jargony, was appropriate for non-technical audiences. So we ultimately identified 17 financial educators from 14 states. And I'll say we ended up with just the most exciting response to our call to participate in these discussion boards. And thank you if any of you are on who participated or who helped get the word out. We ultimately ended up with about 800 people who responded to our initial survey to participate. And so it was just really gratifying to see how important this topic was to so many people. We recruited from listservs, personal contacts, and just sort of put out online that we were looking for financial educators to be part of this study. And we did offer a gift card as an incentive. These online discussion boards are hosted over about 3 days. And each day, between 3 and 4 questions are sort of released. Participants are asked to log in at least twice, sometimes 3 times per day, and respond to the questions. We have the opportunity to have people respond individually. And so that's how some of the questions were asked. Some questions people were asked to respond, and they could already see maybe what other participants had responded. So more like a traditional focus group. And so each of the revised factor definitions, the long definition, the short definition, were shown. We asked for feedback on those. And then we also started to collect a little bit of more qualitative data around how folks were using the factors, or what success stories might they share for times when they had used, as educators, they had used these factors. So we could start to put together some sort of testimonials. Again, a lot of intention was put into making sure that this was a diverse group of stakeholders. And so we got great feedback, some amazing language tweaks out of those discussion boards. And that brings us to our now final revised set of factors that Beth is going to present to us.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela. We do have on here the original language and then the version 2.0. So you can see the original was a well-trained financial educator. The new version is qualified instructional guidance, and Angela can provide more context on each of these with the updated language from all the work that she did. The original was vetted, evaluated financial education program materials, and that version 2.0 is validated educational materials. Timely personal finance instruction was updated to be appropriately timed instruction. Relevant subject matter didn't change. And then evaluating impact became impact evaluation. The big takeaway here is that the original factors were really good. And so not just saying that because Billy's on here, but they were very well done. And so just needed really some tweaks. Nothing was quite missing. So, and that was all validated through Angela's work. So a little painful, but I'm going to read this because, as we heard, language really matters. And so for the first the first factor, I'm going to read qualified instructional guidance word for word. So the full definition is effective personal finance education requires more than presenting financial information. It depends on guidance that reflects a strong understanding of both personal finance and how people learn. In instructor-led settings, this means educators should be knowledgeable, confident, and competent in facilitating learning using teaching practices supported by evidence. In self-directed environments without an instructor, the learning experience must be intentionally designed to promote engagement, reflection, and skill building. Whether delivered by a well-trained instructor or embedded in the structure of a self-directed platform, high-quality personal finance education supports learners in building lasting financial capability through sound instructional design. Angela's going to read the short definition and provide context with the testimonial.
Thanks, Beth. So our short definition, effective personal finance education requires qualified guidance, whether through a skilled educator or a well-designed self-directed platform that applies teaching practices supported by evidence to promote meaningful, lasting financial capability. So one of the things that did come out, as Beth said, we really got where we landed is that these factors were the right ones. We had two things sort of come up that that sort of layered on to many of these factors, and one of them is particularly relevant to this first factor: technology and the role of technology. And so one of the things we really wanted to make sure that the factor definition for qualified instructional guidance allowed for is a self-directed financial education program that potentially did not include an instructor. And so we wanted to both make sure that this could be applied to online versus in-person learning, with an instructor, without an instructor. One of the things that one of our participants in our discussion board mentioned is this testimonial here. This is a K-12 teacher from Texas who really talked about an amazing instructor that they had in their personal finance education and the difference that that made for their learning. And so this, of course, continues to be and is well supported by the research. Qualified instructional guidance is really imperative for effective financial education.
Great, thank you. The second factor is validated educational materials, and the full definition is effective personal finance education relies on materials that are accurate, up to date, and developed with input from experts in personal finance. These materials should align with clearly defined learning objectives, be tailored to the needs and abilities of the intended audience, and be evaluated for the impact on learning. In addition to supporting classroom instruction or structured learning, high-quality materials should also serve as lasting resources that learners can reference and apply beyond the formal learning experience, reinforcing financial capability over time.
Thanks, Beth. The short definition: educational materials for personal finance education should be appropriate for the intended audience, informed by subject matter expertise, evaluated for impact, and designed to serve as lasting resources that learners can use beyond the initial instructional setting. One of the things that came up here, both from our stakeholder interviews as well as our educators in the discussion boards, was that materials really needed to stand the test of time. And that financial education, as we all know, is not a one and done. It's not a soundbite of information. It's not a disclaimer on a credit card statement. It's an ongoing process. And so we wanted to make sure that our definitions here reflected the importance of materials that could be used over time and could be used as resources in the future. So this is a testimonial from Kenneth, who is a university professor from Arizona. And he talked about how having a book that provided an orderly framework for the financial education he was providing to his students was really important and helpful, rather than relying only on sort of piecemeal curricula or piecemeal materials from sources like the IRS, that those were helpful, but having really that vetted material was important.
Thanks, Angela. The next factor is appropriately timed instruction. So the full definition is effective personal finance education is not only about what is taught, but also when it is taught. Instruction should be delivered at a time when learners are ready to understand the concepts and are approaching or actively experiencing related financial decisions. Teaching financial topics too early, before they have any practical relevance, or too late, after decisions have already been made, can reduce impact, retention, and learner engagement. Educational programs should be designed to align the timing of instruction with moments when learners are most likely to engage with, understand, and apply the concepts, maximizing the real-world impact of financial education. Angela?
And the short definition: effective personal finance education delivers instruction at the moment learners are approaching real-life financial decisions and ready to understand the concepts, thereby ensuring greater engagement, understanding, and long-term impact. We all know financial education is, as I said, not a one and done. It's not a one-time soundbite. It's not about this idea of a single, just-in-time sort of bite-sized piece of financial information. Financial education, to be effective, is really a longer-term process. And so we wanted to make sure that this was about more than just this just-in-time idea that sometimes creeps in when we talk about timing. One of our discussion board participants, a K-12 teacher from California, talked about using this idea of appropriate timing in a workforce readiness program, and how, as she was teaching budgeting and saving, the participants were experiencing their first week of employment, getting ready to get their first paychecks. And so it was particularly relevant to hit on that budgeting and saving topic right as folks were about to bring money into the household and need to make some decisions around exactly these topics.
Great. The fourth effective factor is relevant subject matter. Effective personal finance education incorporates a subject matter that reflects the lived experiences, financial realities, and values of the learners it aims to serve. When content is not relatable or grounded in the context of learner circumstances, it risks disengagement and diminished impact. Instruction that is relevant to the individual learner and responsive to the different real-world experiences of diverse communities fosters greater trust, motivation, and behavioral change. To support equity and financial capability, educational content must be selected and framed with an understanding of the barriers and opportunities present in learners' environments.
Thanks, Beth. The short definition here: effective personal finance education is most impactful when the subject matter reflects learners' real-world experiences and values, allowing them to see themselves in the content and apply it in ways that are meaningful and equitable. I mentioned there were two sort of meta topics that came up that we didn't feel were their own factors, but we also were very thoughtful of as we did these revisions. One was technology, the other was equity. And so I think this factor related to relevant subject matter is really one where we wanted to make sure we were reflecting equity considerations and subject matter. What we're teaching is so important as we think about how to use financial education to create a more equitable society. There's a testimonial here from, my screen just got off, from one of our participants who recalled.
It says a K-12 teacher, Angela, if you can't see
that's
it.
the part that just cut off. It's one of our
Okay.
K-12 teachers. Thank you. Grace, a K-12 teacher, talked about this financial literacy program that was intended to support low-income families, and how the curriculum was designed to incorporate real-world scenarios and challenges specifically that low-income families might specifically face. And so had a participant who was a little bit hesitant initially, but when the curriculum started using, or they started to discuss real-world examples, was really the turning point for this participant in making sure she was really getting the impact that financial education might have for her.
Great. And our last of the 5 key factors is impact evaluation. And the full definition is effective personal finance education incorporates ongoing evaluation to assess both overall effectiveness and the extent to which programs and systems serve learners equitably. By measuring changes in learner behavior, knowledge, and confidence, as well as program implementation and access, educators and program leaders can identify what's working, uncover gaps, and make timely adjustments based on evidence to increase inclusion and impact. Ongoing evaluation moves educators and program designers beyond anecdotal feedback, providing meaningful data to refine strategies, enhance effectiveness, and scale what works across settings and populations. Angela?
In the short definition, effective personal finance education includes ongoing evaluation to measure impact and equity, enabling improvements based on evidence that strengthen outcomes, close gaps, and ensure all learners are effectively and equitably served. Here again, you see really us including this idea of financial education as a mechanism for equity. The other thing we really wanted to pull in as we looked to the literature on evaluation is this idea that evaluation isn't something that happens at the end of a program that's kind of one and done. They're like, oh, how did we do? Did we do well? Did we not do well? Effective impact evaluation is ongoing. It's happening during the program. And not only is it happening during the program, but results from that rapid cycle evaluation are being used to make real time, ideally, changes to curriculum, changes to whichever of the other factors might need tweaked to improve that financial education going forward. So there's always this sort of cycle of evaluation and improvement, not just the one and done evaluation we sometimes think about when we think about impact evaluation. One of the cool things that we were able to do in the discussion board is to incorporate folks who weren't teaching in a K-12 or a higher education setting, but were financial educators for a community-based and sometimes religious-based organization in their community. And so we had a participant from Virginia who was engaged in community-based financial education, who talked about the use of evaluations and how it helped to identify where the participants in that specific program were facing some challenges. That information was then used to change some curriculum, and really there were some great successes based on the use of the impact evaluation results into the program curriculum.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela.
Yeah.
I just want to take a moment to say Angela was incredible to work with. She was an amazing researcher. As you can see, she did incredible work and really validated the revised versions of the factors. So it was pure joy to work with you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. It was great for me.
Of course. So now that we have these factors, the revised version, really, how can these be used? So we really want these to be a tool and resource for the field. And they are designed to apply to a variety of financial education settings. So K-12, post-secondary, as we talked about, as Angela talked about, with the different teachers and in different spaces. So really for anyone who's educating someone on financial education, the factors can be applied. They are a guide to best practice that should inform policy design and program implementation decisions. And then the factors can provide a framework for program review, evaluation, iteration, and improvement. So really hoping they can be used in multiple ways and as a very hopefully validated tool for others. So we just wanted to go through each factor and offer suggestions. This is by no way exhaustive. These are just some ideas of how they can be applied for different audiences. So researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And so looking at the first factor, qualified instructional guidance, for researchers, it's a reminder to study the different types of instruction. So look at different pedagogy, look at content expertise, and help that determine which leads to better outcomes for learners. For practitioners, obviously teacher training is very important, pursue certifications, ongoing professional development, and just ensure that cultural competency, that you are culturally competent to adapt the curriculum to different students from different backgrounds, as Angela talked about. And then for policymakers, just a reminder, an important plug to fund teacher training programs as part of K-12 financial education requirements. It's critically important to having effective financial education. On the second factor, so validated educational materials, again, not exhaustive, just some ideas. For researchers that might be on the webinar, test curricula for effectiveness and bias. Obviously use rigorous methods. For practitioners, choose materials that are evidence-based rather than sponsored or sales-driven. So there's a ton of evidence-based, validated, free curriculum out there in the K-12 space and also post-secondary space. And then for policymakers, support access to repositories of trusted resources. So their state and national standards, make sure these are accessible to teachers and educators. On the third factor, appropriately timed instruction, some ideas of how this can be used for researchers, study just-in-time interventions for instruction as a data point into the studies that you're conducting. For practitioners, tailor guidance to timing of events for learners, which is the definition of appropriately timed instruction. And then for policymakers, integrate financial education into policies related to key life course events. So as you're thinking about other policies that you're writing around student loans, home buying, retirement, add a piece of financial education into those policies because it better serves everyone. For relevant subject matter, researchers can identify which topics matter most for specific populations. So looking at recent graduates, middle career adults, retirement, what topics are most important for those audiences. For practitioners, localized content to the learners. So cost of living, cultural norms, financial systems vary widely. So again, making sure that the content is customized for the individuals. And then for policymakers, ensure statewide selected curricula reflect real world financial decisions for learners. So just make sure it's obviously relevant. For the last one, for impact evaluation, researchers conduct, it's another plug to conduct financial education program evaluations. This not only helps learners by identifying outcomes, it also helps these programs with funding to be able to show that the programs are effective through the evaluation. For practitioners, for educators and that are teaching in the classroom, it's important to measure their outcomes through available pre and post test assessments. And then for policymakers, it's another plug on the K-12 side to include an evaluation component in the education requirements as a policy best practice. But really, we want to hear from you how you'd like to use from the field. How can you use these 5 key factors and how can they be a tool for you? And so we're going to do a quick poll. If everyone could do the QR code on your phone, and it should be pretty painful, not painful, painless, hopefully. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. And then we just have a few quick questions and we want to do a poll and see how these can be used. Hopefully everyone had time to do that really quick. So the first question is, in what ways could you leverage the 5 key factors in your work? And we have a couple ideas here. The QR code is also included on this slide. So hopefully it works for everyone. Great, it's working. How exciting. And if you are writing if you want to, if there's a space to add what that might be, that would be very helpful for us. All right, so it looks like the supporting program implementation is winning. So the majority of you are saying that would be a helpful way to leverage the 5 key factors in your work. And then also educating stakeholders and partners. And then a little bit of guiding policy design decisions, and then also conducting program evaluation. Great, thank you for that. All right, the next question is, what specific or creative ways might NEFE and other partners leverage the 5 key factors going forward? So we'll give everyone a minute to enter their answer. I see people are typing, thank you. All right, we have materials coming in, reaching out to different age demographics, act as a guide, influence state policy, use it as a criteria for evaluating educators, not just programs. That's a good point, thank you. Practical training of implementation examples, for materials and webinars, designing program interventions, creating a rubric checklist for program creation, policy implementation, creating pre and post surveys, communication and advocacy, and reaching out to different audiences. So it looks like 4 people commented on program, 3 people on the materials. Continue to demonstrate the factors with current materials. Great, yeah, this can also be used as an advocacy tool. See 2 more people are typing, so I'll wait another minute or 10 seconds. With the momentum and success of implementing K-12 programs, to use these definitions to help buttress efforts to expand financial education to adult populations. Great point. And then work with FinLit curriculum providers to stress the importance of highly trained instructors. Awesome, thank you. Again, use materials and webinars. And this will help us guide what other materials we can create that can be helpful for you in the field. So this is helpful for us as well. Thank you. All right, we have I think it's our last question. What is one word that can describe your reaction to the revised 5 key factors? Well, impressed. Thank you. Powerful. Impressive, optimistic, relevant, curious, legit, clear, encouraging, informative, specific, innovative, wonderful, and relevant, practical, transformative, straightforward, helpful, intentional, validated. Relevant is winning, the largest word. Thank you. That's reassuring and validating for our work. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to now we're going to just have Q&A. So we'll open it up to everyone with your questions, and Angela, myself, and Dr. Billy Hensley can provide answers.
Okay, we did have a couple come in so far. Angela, I think this one's going to be for you. Regarding the 17 financial educators, how did you select only 17 out of 800? Was it a random selection? How did you assure that you were not imposing bias?
Yeah.
How many did you have from the higher ed space?
Yeah, so that's a great question and always a challenge when we do qualitative work to sort of make sure we're getting a good representation. Generally, what we do is we had already identified some quotas. And so rather than just taking sort of who came in, we had already identified we want to get 3 from the higher ed space, we want to get 2 from the community-based space. So we weren't impacted by just what we were seeing come in. The way we generally sort of make selections is that we take what we think will be the most difficult to recruit folks and prioritize those. In addition to the factors that we showed, where we had some quotas, we had age quotas. We asked a question in the intake survey about tenure, how long they had been teaching. And so we selected folks who fit into the buckets that we had decided before we started recruiting were really relevant. But definitely there's an art as well as science to selecting respondents for qualitative work. And I think that work we had done before we even started recruiting is what helps us minimize the bias that we might be imposing by selecting certain individuals.
Great. Another one, qualified instructional guidance suggests practitioners pursue certifications. Can you provide more context around certifications?
We're all just smiling. Angela, do you want to do that one first? Or Billy? Yeah.
I think about this a lot. What we want is not only a certified educator, but one who feels confident and competent with this subject matter. So many people who are teaching this, or at least have started teaching this subject in the last few years, are learning alongside their students. And what we want is to normalize credentialing within this topic area in pre-service, meaning when they're still studying to be educators, and then through professional development, in-service type training. I know that there's one program in particular, I think it's in Arizona, that's doing some in-service certification work. What I would love to see is that at least one of the institutions, higher ed institutions in each state, create a certification or some kind of extra course or materials or PD or whatever, so that we have folks ready to go in the classroom. But ideally, we want to get to a place where this is a track within schools of education. If you're secondary education major and your emphasis is, list all the other subjects that we know are in schools, that this should also be one of those subject areas where you can take a class or two or do some kind of training to be ready. Because it's not only important to be competent with your teaching skills, but to be confident in the subject that you're covering. Um, and and by that I mean I don't just mean if you're certified to teach social studies and this just happens to be under social studies that it counts, that you need this class or some kind of training within the subject. I mean, that's ultimately what I want to get to. I actually met with some deans of schools of education many years ago when I was basically best job before I was in the job I'm in. And a lot of them, told me it's too soon, they're not ready. And of course, there wasn't demand then, as like there is now. So I do think if we can sort of keep this momentum going and there's a clarity around what should happen to help teachers become certified, we give guidance there. There's some outlines available. I do think it may be easier because there's this wall of demand coming. We have all these states that it's passed legislation, but it hasn't made it to the classroom yet. There's a lot of teachers, thousands of them. We're estimating 30,000 teachers need some credentialing, or we would hope that would be credentialed, or some PD by 2031. 30,000 more teachers, I should say, than that are already in the class.
Yeah, well, what we see in the literature is a strong indication, as Billy said, that some sort of training and having instructors who are qualified to teach financial education, in addition to maybe they're also teaching social studies, maybe they're also teaching business, is what's important. This confidence idea is also showing up in the literature quite a bit, that we need financial educators who are confident in their ability to teach these topics. I think credentialing is one really nice way to get to teachers we know have a consistent minimum of instruction. And I think that consistency is also really important, that with credentialing, we know that there's a consistent level of education that someone might have been provided as part of their preparedness to teach this topic. And so I think that is very, very clear in the literature.
I did like this question. How does NEFE view the factors role in the field compared to the CFPB tools or other similar resources?
I'll jump in and then Billy and Angela can weigh in as well. So I would say it's very complementary to the tools that exist. It just reinforces that the literature shows these are the five key factors that are important, even if there are other factors added in other organizations that have similar tools. It's so very much complementary and very much just validates how important these are. And Billy, Angela, anything you want to add? Okay.
I like this one too. Were any plain language experts involved, or were the updated factors tested for simplicity?
This is
As
all
a comms
Angela.
person,
Yeah.
I like that question.
That's a great question. And so the final phase, the final stage of that we talked about in our methodology, these online discussion boards, is where we wanted to test that language. And so these are not researchers, like these are not folks with PhDs like we have in household finance. These were sort of everyday folks with boots on the ground, sometimes teaching at a church, sometimes teaching at college, but engaged in financial education in an everyday way. And I have to say, we went into these definitions with that in mind. We wanted these to be accessible to everyone, regardless of whether they were sort of a technical researcher in this space or someone, again, teaching out of a church, teaching out of a community-based organization. And we were pretty shocked at some of the language we still had included in our definitions, that when someone pointed out, hey, that's a really technical term, we were like, oh, we used the word pedagogical. And so I will say the discussion board was just incredibly helpful in making sure we were using plain language that was accessible to everyone. So I love that question, and it was very much top of mind for us in finalizing these definitions.
That's what happens when you have research nerds write things. We gotta fix the jargon. Yeah.
Yep, yep,
I think
exactly.
we have time for a few more here. Can you talk more about the timely instruction and how it differs from the types of financial information provided to consumers at key moments, like when they take out a loan?
Um, well, I would say if you're not familiar with the personal finance ecosystem on our website, that's a good place to start because it shows how all of these elements play a role in promoting the overall financial well-being, helping people sort of through the continuum of financial well-being, if you will. And I've never liked that phrase just in time because for me, it implies you don't have to plan. Like it's like, oh, just in time, like you just scoot in at the last minute. That's not what it means, but I feel like that's what it implies. But this notion about timely, what we know from the research literature is that when you can relate to something, um, you start to anchor in what it means for you, whether it's something you're interested in general, or it's something that's happened to you in your life. And this is particularly helpful for older teens and young adults and all adults, really. It's called transformative learning theory, and it's in the adult research area where you are, latching onto something that's someone else experienced in your family. And so it can be that, and it can also be you're starting to think about college, you're starting to think about getting trained for your career. And so it's not a far jump to go from being a teen and thinking about jobs and what does all of the jargon, since we're talking about jargon, what's the jargon on the paycheck mean? All the minuses that happen to the paycheck. Because if you're talking about mutual funds to third graders, you're going to use very different language, but you're going to talk about it in a way that's meaningful and relevant to a third grader about diversification, but you're going to use very different language, very different examples. That's really what we mean here. Now, timely, if you're trying to save money on your TV streaming, subscriptions, we probably all have too many of those, right? Except Michelle Jones. She told me she cut a lot of hers off. She's on our staff. She's a good financial literacy advocate there. But this notion of like, how do I save? How can I bundle? That's really good information that will save you a few dollars each month, and that'll add up over time. And so all of this works together. And so, this is the professorial long-winded answer, but really what it comes down to is all of these things are important. But what we want is each learner to to know how to become the CFO of their financial life. And that's where a robust, fully designed financial education is helpful. But you're going to have to pursue financial information throughout your whole life.
I think we have time for one more, and this is one I think for Beth and Billy. How might these definitions help evolve what we can expect to see from NEFE in the public policy and advocacy space?
Yeah, great question. So obviously they'll be used as a great tool for advocacy. So when we are advocating for more states to pass financial education requirements, these can be kind of the guideline for what needs to go into those policies, what teachers need to have. There needs to be funding, the curriculum that needs to be provided, all at the individual and learner at the center of that. So definitely we will build off of this as one of our policy and advocacy tools and continue to promote this when we're out there advocating for effective financial education.
Yeah. Perfectly said, Beth. I want to remind people or share with people if they don't know, um, you know, there's a piece of this here, the evaluating impact, even on small scale. We have an evaluation toolkit on our website where you can create, some short assessments. You can create your own questions, but you can start collecting data now. And that's going to help you on a lot of levels. It's going to help you get that real-time feedback that Angela was talking about. It's going to help you gather information to make the case for what you're doing. And if you're in a community setting, or if you're in higher education, or if you're doing extension work in communities, having really good information about the value add you're bringing is important when you're raising money, when you are looking for shelf space in terms of what's happening in the community or at the organization where you work. And so, utilize those tools. And we're actually working on a national assessment that's program agnostic and so forth. So there's a lot of things coming as well from NEFE to be able to help with elements of this. And we're exploring internally what does it mean for us to help champion this, first factor about good instruction, and what does that look like? Right now, we support that through sponsorships, like giving sponsorships to things like the National Educator Conference or the CEE conference, so that we're subsidizing attendance, so it's lower cost or no cost for teachers. But we're also looking at other ways that we can help do that. So we look and operate on all levels of this in some way or another, even though we don't provide direct programming. And we're launching our strategic plan next month that will give you an indication of what we're looking at and the questions that we're seeking to answer over the next 3 or so years. But a lot of that has to do with strengthening the infrastructure upon which financial education is delivered. So as you have thoughts about that, as you see us out in the world, out on the road and speaking at conferences, grab coffee with us, tell us what you think, because all of your feedback sort of accumulates in our minds, and it helps us as we're advocating for what you do, or helping to fund the creation of tools to help you do what you do. So,
Well said, Billy. And we're about to hit the top of the hour, so just want to say thank you to our panelists as well as all our attendees. We will be sharing a recording of this webinar with all the registrants that this registered today. We invite you to visit nefe.org to learn more about the 5 key factors, more about Financial Capability Month, view recordings of our previous webinars, and much more. You'll also be able to subscribe to our newsletter. Additionally, you can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Medium, YouTube, and Instagram. Thanks again, and have a great day.